Welcome back to another episode of Reading Rehab, our Data Nerds segment. I am Mike Brown, joined by...
Bryan Gardner.
And no Pat Healy today, but we do have another special guest filling in for him.
So Roy's a colleague of mine. We work together at Liquid Sports Lab, where he's the owner, also runs all our biomechanical data and interpretation. But yeah, I'll let him kind of run on his background. Very interesting as an engineer working in sport.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Bryan, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I was very lucky. Graduated college in December 2021, and first job ever was in the NBA. I got to go over to Dallas with the Dallas Mavericks and spend some time as an analyst over there, primarily focusing on like the data science part of game strategy and management. But got very lucky. My degree and like concentration in school was biomechanics, biomedical engineering, and got really lucky that load management became a really big term in the NBA, and demystifying some of the data and processes around it became an even bigger conundrum in the NBA. So spent a year with them. I tell everyone pre-Luka trade, I had nothing to do with it. And spent a year with them from December 2021 to about December 2022, and then was lucky enough to get a promotion as a senior analyst over with the Toronto Raptors. Spent some time there, and then their sports performance lab, the MLSE Sports Performance Lab, where I got to kind of apply some of the predictive injury aspects as well as the predictive game strategy aspects across sports science and biomechanics and just in-game strategy as well. And MLSE owning a couple more teams, having the Raptors and Leafs and Toronto Argonauts just provided a really great basis to start, extrapolating other sports and other successful behaviors as well. And then came back to Rochester this past year. I've been here about a year now. It's about January 2024, so about a year plus now, and running Liquid Sports Lab full time, which is where Bryan and I get to do a bunch of cool stuff together that we get to share some of here today.
Sweet. I'm excited to hear about this stuff. So
we have a very interesting case we're going to talk about. More obviously a baseball athlete, but just to give a rundown of the case. So it's a 20-year-old male, 11 months post-op left ACLR, currently playing collegiate baseball. He ruptured his ACL in the fall prior to last season in football. However, this person was throwing in-game in April of that following spring season. So pretty quick. There's also a possible torn meniscus after throwing 4 months post-op. We assessed him in September. And so what does that look like? So we do a physical assessment. So in very simple terms, a functional movement screen and a power assessment. And then Roy does a biomechanical assessment of his throwing off the mound, which he'll get into after we go through a few of his data points that we first started off with. And he decided not to play football, which was more of a personal choice. He wanted to focus on baseball and have a good off season. So that's kind of where we're at with him once he got to us in September. And then we kind of made programming and just adjustments to his programming throughout the winter as he prepared for this spring season, which we'll kind of talk about. Roy will kind of update everybody on how his status is. So some of the tests that we kind of looked at, I guess I run the range of motion side of it. So looking at knee, hip, and ankle. We also look at like thoracic rotation, more from the throwing side of things, but we'll keep it to lower body since this individual had a ACL repair. Again, he's a right-handed pitcher. So that's his left knee is his, I guess, front side, for those that are not familiar with the throwing mechanics. We also did counter movement jump. We used the Vald Force Dex, and then we used the 3Motion AI biomechanical assessment of his pitching motion on top of it. So again, going more from a physical component to actual skill was where we kind of developed a difference when we are talking about, I guess, performance enhancing, because again, his performance will be on the mound, and then hopefully as he gets better and better, we'll see velocity jumps and everything like that. So this is just a quick overview of what we found initially. Nothing glaring. So this person was, I want to say, almost 11 months post-op, and he did a really good job about getting range of motion. So there was no real sort of deficiency other than his right hip lacking some internal rotation. So that's his back hip. And that this is getting more like nitpicky when it comes to mechanics. So he's unable to kind of internally rotate that hip when he sits back into that driving off the mound. So that might give him some lack of, I guess, accessing his posterior chain, which again, we will look at once he gets more of the biomechanical assessment. And then we used a inclinometer with a clinometer app, and then just a standard Goni for his knee range of motion.
Do you like that app, by the way?
I use it all the time. That is my go-to for my lumbar screen, for my ankle dorsiflexion, my hip internal rotation. I would recommend it. It is free, at least the version that I have. So that's the other thing that's really nice about it.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's easy. It's just the setup. Sometimes you just have to make sure you have your bony landmarks and make it standard so that you're not like just putting it on willy-nilly that way.
Yeah, it's fair.
And it honestly doesn't really work that well with the knee either. You have to pick and choose joints that you can use it for. So that's the only other thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. No, it's always good to ask. So this is where we use this. This is some of the stuff that I look at. So we look at concentric impulse, right and left. So looking at concentric impulse, just the amount of force generated during a concentric phase of the movement. So specifically where they are taking off the plate. And then I look at the eccentric deceleration phase of impulse. There was a 9.5% difference, so an asymmetry. And again, not huge, but also 11 months, you'd probably like to see that a little bit better. Also looking at eccentric rate of force development, so the ability to develop force rapidly in a lengthened position. So he was about 7.2%. And then the landing phase was also, you talk about the ability to land and accept force. There was a 32% difference, which will kind of go through when he comes down on that left leg. So his front side will take a lot of force when he does land on his front side to kind of pivot off that lead leg block. So being able to accept force is going to be a huge thing for this individual, especially when he's trying to throw a ball as hard as he can. Any questions with that, Mike?
In the maybe I'm just silly. How is the landing impulse different from the eccentric deceleration phase impulse?
So the asymmetry the landing impulse refers to the difference of force and the time it takes each leg to absorb the impact of landing. And then you talked about the deceleration, just the force applied over time.
Yeah, but I guess just the way I understood plyometrics is like eccentric deceleration is part of landing. So do I have that wrong? Is that or is like the landing impulse bit like part of the eccentric deceleration phase impulse?
It's part of the eccentric deceleration phase. So the deceleration phase is like this long phase, and then the landing is like on initial contact. So it's a smaller window of time.
Gotcha.
So really looking at it from a concentric impulse, really not a lot of difference. So concentrically, he was fine to generate the force. It was the accepting and the force absorption aspect or capability that this individual may have been missing out in his training. So that was something that we were leaning into when it came to his, I guess, training, more gym specific training, more than the like throwing side of it, which we'll kind of go through the throwing side of it once we go through the biomechanical aspect and how that transfers. So this is just, again, interpretation. So we focus a lot targeted on eccentric strength, deceleration capabilities, and a lot of just unilateral strength development. I mean, this individual he's pretty strong, but again, very strong in bilateral, as we can kind of see when we did take a look at his peak power. He was pretty, be able to express force in a bilateral stance, but again, looking at it from a right to left standpoint, he definitely lacked the eccentric capabilities. And then so with that, Roy's going to go over to the biomechanical aspect of it.
Yeah, I'm going to try to share my screen here and make sure I share the right screen here. Yeah, like Bryan, I got to show you my setup at home. It's like 8 different screens just because it's all data all the time. So yeah, obviously, blurred the face of this individual, blurred the name of this individual. We can kind of see one of the apps we use here is we're big in markerless motion capture, and the reason for it is it plays really well in these types of situations. So anytime you change the environment on an athlete, the total stimulus that they experience, they might just be slightly more guarded in how they experience the environment. So if you have a guy and basically, just to not sugarcoat words, you make him strip down to his boxers and put a bunch of markers on him, we might not be getting the full version of that person, just because it's a very strange environment for the athlete to be able to create the same forces through something they've never done before in most cases. So that's why we're very big on markerless motion here. And application we use on an everyday basis is 3Motion AI. Just allows us to get feedback naturally, as well as keep a continual log on our athletes to make sure that the programming that we're prescribing based on the biomechanical and just power screening and functional movement screening that Bryan touched on earlier is actually translating to increases in whatever is their limiting factor that we're putting emphasis on for that phase. So here's his baseline test. It'll take us through several key points in the delivery that just occur for a pitching delivery in baseball. And I'll kind of pause it here just so we can get an emphasis on what his biggest limiting factor was, which in high level baseball populations, specifically pitchers, you want to see this lead leg. So right here, I think the mouse will show on my screen. You want to see that lead leg as close to 180 degrees, if not in slight hyperextension at lead leg block. And so what that kind of shows us is the ability to slow down and normalize the force, the linear and rotational force created from the movement currently. And being able to decel in the pitching movement, specifically with that lead leg, allows us to transfer that force to the upper trunk, to the extremities, and ultimately into the ball. And so coming back from ACL surgery, we see we don't see that hyperextension. I mean more as a more extension in the lead leg from landing through ball release that we do in other athletes. And so here he is at landing, at front foot landing, and we want to see almost a violent extension and through ball release. And we don't really see that violent extension through ball release. And just a hypothesis that we had was him coming back so early, 4 months after having ACL reconstruction. He just wasn't able to. I mean, nobody would be able to normalize that kind of force 4 months from ACL surgery. And because he pitched a full season without that full use of the front leg, it became like a learned behavior where he no longer was utilizing his lower body to its full capacity, even though he had the strength, he had the static range of motion to be able to do so. So a large part of our programming was almost a sort of reprogramming, teaching the athlete to be able to normalize force over the entire end range that he had almost taught himself not to do because he wasn't able to do it earlier. And that was a big part of what we did. And it was just being able to teach him that off the mound. It just, the mound is obviously a slope. Again, we talk about foreign environments. So first, Bryan did a lot of great reprogramming, revolving around just medicine balls and being able to create that extension on a flat surface. And so once he was able to then create the same amount of force just over a wider range of extension in that front leg on a flat surface, we knew that, okay, we're starting to make some good waves there. And then now we can translate this over to the mound and start coaxing it back into his delivery over, I think we had 6 to 8 months with him, luckily. And so we were able to, I'm going to pull up our database here without revealing it. And I think he gained on average, it kind of came all at once for him. Obviously, that sometimes just happens in athletes, but he gained about 3 degrees of extension through ball release month over month. His most latest retest at ball release, he's at 177 degrees of lead knee extension, which, I don't think it'll show us the direct angle here, but I mean, if we were to just draw an angle here, you can see this being 90, right? This is probably 135 to 150-ish. If you just look at this angle right here. And so now he's about 177. So he still can get a little bit better. We see a lot of elite high level throwers at that 180 or actually into that plus 180 mark. We'll get to 185, 190. So there's still room to grow, but ultimately our goal is to get outcomes, right? So this baseline screening, 81 to 83 miles an hour. He left our facility at 84 to 87 miles an hour. In game right now at the university that he's playing at, D3 University of upstate New York, he's about 84 to 86 miles an hour, leading his team in ERA thus far in the season. And ultimately that's our goal, being able to get outcomes, not just numbers for our client population.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate some of the stuff that we noticed also with him kind of going through the velocity phase was his ability to decel on a pull down, which I know he struggled with because, again, that's running at full speed and then throwing a baseball on as hard as you can. So he really had to reteach, and that's why I put that sort of deceleration capability. Is we actually had to reteach him how to slow down, so that he could be more comfortable with more force being applied through that front leg. So again, if you're running at full speed and trying to throw a baseball, you're going to get a lot more force through that front leg than you are from the mound. So we're just trying to teach that sort of front side to be able to withstand that force through that front leg and that front leg lead block.
I also think it's interesting too, the nature of how he tore his ACL was, and this is more of a question for you guys because I do, very little work on the return from injury side, was the nature of how he tore the ACL was running a comeback route that it just kind of gave on him, non-contact ACL, and then having him struggle with deceleration onwards. Like I'm not really sure. I've never really dealt with direct return from injury populations. Like, is that something you guys see? Like, is that event of trauma then like a huge kind of limiting factor to try and get over in the rehab?
Yeah, I mean, there's a psychological aspect of it that he probably just didn't trust that knee, especially if he hasn't had to do that. I mean, you think about it, he does it from a throwing side, but at full speed, being able to stop is probably something psychological on top of like the physical side of it. So that's kind of, I mean, that's a way to kind of teach that person that it is okay to stop on that leg. I think it's, again, he wasn't with us during that return to play side of it. Like I said, he was pretty quick to jump on a mound and start throwing, which again is another totally different topic. How can a person tear their ACL and be back on the mound and throwing? I think it was few months after. So
Yeah, I was curious about that. Do you think like the decision was just like, well, you don't really need you're not using your knees when you're throwing. It's like all your arms, so you can like start throwing earlier. I mean, obviously we're just speculating, right? So
yeah, I mean, I like I said, it's maybe a further question on why for the individual, maybe he was pushing it that he was his freshman year. He was brought in to play 2 sports in college. Got to the first year of football, had a major injury, and then freshman year you get back and you want to be able to produce and kind of experience collegiate baseball. But also knowing that you've had this very significant injury. So I'm unfamiliar with how quick that would have been. But also just the lack of knowledge that throwing is through the full kinetic chain as well, might be where that sort of quick return happened. And again, just speculating on that, just because we don't have sort of what he was also pushing for, what kind of protocol that was, who was driving what ship, and that kind of thing.
yeah, I have another question too, and maybe you guys won't have great answers to this, but so this was obviously to his like lead leg. How do you think biomechanics in like especially biomechanics in pitching would change if it were his I don't know, back leg? Is that the technical term for it?
Yeah, I don't think he'd be able to play if it was his back leg.
Okay.
Like the the compressive force that like you would have to be able to tolerate to then push off the mound. I don't think he would have been able to come back in 3 months, 4 months, whatever it was. You can't even honestly, like, you shouldn't be able to tolerate in the front leg either. But I think by the nature of, like, we'll just call it a ginger landing, right? He was gingerly kind of landing on that leg and not getting into full extension and just kind of using whatever he had without putting full extension to that leg and thereby full force into that front leg. The only reason I think he was able to play was because it was that front leg. But obviously, as a result, he basically it really is like an evolution. He basically evolved negatively, where he just changed his pitching motion to basically cut off that front leg and just use it as a balance point, but not really a point of violence or like biomechanical force translation to be able to then create like reactive force up the kinetic chain. So it was honestly pretty impressive, like from an elite level, like athlete level, like being able to come back and do what he did. But I don't think there's any way if it was his back leg he'd be able to put any force into it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of personally from a pitching side and looking at it from more of my own perspective of pushing off of that back leg. You get a lot more rotary component through that back leg, just because you're on that rubber. he kind of opens up and gets into that sagittal plane a little bit more. He's going to get some rotary through there, but he can, like Roy said, compensate a little bit more by keeping the knee soft. But from a driving off perspective, he's going to get a lot more rotation through that knee, especially since he's got lack of internal rotation in that hip. So that might be another sort of, again, compensation pattern that he's just kind of figured out because of how cool the human body is to figure out how to complete tasks.
Yeah, I think it's so impressive that he was able to throw even like with the velocity that he did have in the beginning, like just knowing that there was this like relatively large fault in that front leg biomechanics there.
Yeah, I think that just kind of speaks volumes to. So like skill acquisition is something we talk about a lot, like from a sports science perspective. And like he's a phenomenal athlete. Like we had someone from his lab in our just like at Liquid recently checking it out. And I was just having a conversation with him and he was telling me like how good of an athlete he is. And I've always attributed athleticism, like that global word athleticism, to the ability to acquire skills quickly. And like that's exactly what he did. Like he's just always been a top athlete. I mean, even to play 2 sports at a collegiate level requires being a really good athlete. And like it's almost like his athleticism is the thing that helped him just be able to change his mechanics, learn this behavior, even though it was a bad behavior long term, but for the short term, learn this behavior to to provide whatever input he could 3-4 months after ACL surgery, and then unlearn it to be able to come back fully healthy for this season. So kudos to him, and I guess his nervous system for his ability to learn things and unlearn things so quickly.
Yeah, Brian, I was also curious what what would be some of the exercises you would do, like the specific like methods that you were doing to get this back for him?
Yeah, so Roy mentioned some med ball work. So we would just teach that sort of lead leg. We'd kind of constraint base, put him in a specific position, and then being able to like understand and reprogram his rotation off of that front lead leg block. So again, more transferable using a med ball than say anything else. But a lot of it was like a lot of eccentric, like front foot elevated split squats with an eccentric like phase, just more focused on that side of it. He did have some stuff he was doing with his like strength and conditioning staff at his university, but we kind of supplemented stuff that he may have not been getting, specifically a lot of the unilateral work. So he would kind of take that ownership on himself to be able to do that. So we kind of just utilized that, and he would do all his med ball work prior to throwing. So he was already getting into that sort of motor pattern prior to him throwing either on off the mound. And I think that's where we, and Roy, correct me if I'm wrong, he did a lot of his throwing plyos included off the mound just so that he could potentially just feel that instead of on a flat ground.
Yeah, and I think it's like delaying. The mound is so crucial in baseball because you have to essentially delay the onset of rotation by the increment that the mound is sloped to allow for maximum translation. And so, yeah, it was like this gradual process is like getting him to be able to be comfortable in that knee, just in life, like walking, running, sitting, doing anything, getting him to be able to be like violent, explosive, athletic on that knee with just flat ground where he can kind of, the body can naturally infer when that front foot strike is going to happen because it's a level, quite literally a level playing field. And then the third step is doing that on the mound because it's kind of a somewhat foreign and not so much a human innate ability to like delay the onset of rotation by the derivative of the slope. And so we had to work him through basically on like from the beginning, work him through all those processes to get him back to not just like A, rotating well generally, B, rotating well off the mound, and then C, being able to just Now the goal is to almost introduce chaos where you can rotate well no matter what the environment looks like. And that's another thing Bryan and I talked about is him being such a good athlete. We hit this point where we were like, okay, the better that he can be just globally rotating through whatever chaos he has to get through, the better he's going to be on the mound because of his ability to acquire these refined motor skills pretty quickly. And so it was definitely an interesting process there.
That maybe this just demonstrates my lack of knowledge about baseball, but is the mound decline standardized for all mounds?
It's supposed to be. Unfortunately, Division III level or high school level, anywhere outside the elite Division I level, like Power 5 level, it's not. But I mean, conceptually, it's supposed to be.
Yeah, from personal experience, they're not all the same. Just
So like
depending on the level you play it.
Because that would be another consideration for him too, is like he has to understand how much of an incline there is, like just intuitively, to then know when he needs to I guess extend and strike, if that makes sense. Like he just has to be able to go through these like different ranges there.
Yeah, I mean, he's also throwing on this specific example. That's like turf, so it's a very where he'll either throw on turf or on dirt. And Roy, correct me if I'm wrong. He's thrown out of the pen, or is he starting?
No, he's starting.
Yeah. So I mean, he has some where like then he doesn't have to worry about any sort of like, especially in Division III, like the mounds get ripped up pretty quickly. So it's kind of having the ability to have like a flat surface to land on, but there are obviously, like Roy said, some chaotic mounds where they're not always going to be flat when you first get out there if you're a relief pitcher. But also the surface is just going to be different. So his ability to kind of be comfortable on all surfaces as well as inclines, and even from like a frontal plane side of things, because again, you may hit a hole depending upon where you land and the mound that is what you're using or throwing off of. So I think that's also a big thing. I think it goes back to his athleticism to be able to have that. But again, chaos is going to be the last sort of thing. And we've talked about this in prior podcast, Mike, of the controlled chaos continuum. I mean, obviously this is completely different than soccer. But it is chaotic when you first get out there from mound kind of perspective.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me because as you can tell, I know very little about baseball.
Well, we'll eventually get into some running, Mike. That's right up your alley.
That's all I was thinking about was like, man, this motion capture system would be really cool for running analysis. But I mean, do you guys have anything else on this? Or I feel like we went over a lot there.
No, I don't think so. I think going back to the fact that this is all about the performance on the mound, I think we sometimes lose track of the skill side of return to sport, especially as physical therapists, because again, we just want this person to be healthy. I think blending the two together from a skill acquisition to biomechanical analysis to the physical side, like force capabilities, range of motion, I think is where elite level sort of, I guess, groups are doing the right thing. Where I think we miss that sometimes is the skill acquisition aspect, because we're so just ingrained to just make them feel good from physical therapy. So I think that's just my big take home when it comes to like find people in your area and really harness their abilities to help you get this person that's sitting in front of you as a physical therapist that if they want to go do something like throw off a mound or throw or anything, like you were saying, just running that way, find a coach or a person that can help you with that stuff. So
I also think this is why it kind of showcases. I think more people are coming like along and around to it, but it showcases the importance of impulse data, right? Because if we didn't have this blend of force plate collection as well as statics and dynamics collection as well as the entire kinematic system, we wouldn't know how it plays into the ultimate goal, right? So if we were sitting here and just saying, oh well, he's got full range of motion in the leg, like he's good to go, like do whatever you want, we would miss a lot of these goal-based outcomes that are necessary for him to achieve, for him to be successful off the mound, right? And I think that's where impulse data is critical, where it's like the timing of it, the nature of it is so much more important in getting to these elite level goals, like being an elite college baseball starter, than just pure range of motion data in return from injury.
For sure. Yeah, impulse is definitely like coming around as like, oh, this is really important. Yeah, which is why I guess a reason why we have this this part of the podcast is to go over like how we use that data clinically. Well, I think that's a great spot to end. So, as always, if people have listened this far, please consider leaving a nice review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, hello. And yeah, thank you.